It is going to be an action-packed day. It's kind of like an iceberg. What you're going to see is just the tip, and there's a whole year's worth of work that's gone in behind it. So it should be really fun. I think I'm on. I have thumbs up from communications. Okay, we're going to start out with the Heritage District. This was actually a request of council to staff on getting the ROI together. And so we've had some great work from economic development, from Dan and his group in pulling this together. So we wanted to start out and look at what's some of the visual difference that we see in the Heritage District over time. And so prior to 2000, this was the water tower. It's kind of meh. It's silver. But this is the water tower today, where it's very visually appealing. When we want to announce to the world that we're the most prosperous city in the country, that's the background that we use to that picture. We have a heck of a lot of fun lighting it up in all different colors and enjoying the celebration, having that be part of our community. It's also a place that people are starting to celebrate their great life events, and that's a huge difference in what the Heritage District is now compared to what it was. There's also a big difference in the land and how we're using it. You can see the mobile homes that were in residence at the time, and now we have buildings and shopping and education and parking and retail. We have a lot of activity and things happening in the downtown area that weren't prior to this period of time. This is a picture from 2008, and then this is present. Our communication group just did an aerial view earlier this week for us to say, what is that difference? Again, a lot more excitement happening, a lot less field, and more life and living happening there. There are some other changes in calls for service for police. You can see that over time, we only have data back to 2007, and so that's as far back as we could go. For the ROI analysis, we're doing 1995 to 2017. So there is an increase in calls for service. One of the things to note, if we look at the 10 most common types of calls for service over that period of time, that ratio stays relatively the same over that period of time, with the exception on here of noise disturbance and juveniles disturbing. And we're working on those issues. So more people in the area, more things happening. There's also a huge increase in sales tax growth over this period of time. This is the data that we can release because we have the right number of businesses. It's also as far back as we have the actual data. So there's a 177% increase over this period of time from 2008 to 2017. If we extrapolate back to 1995 using what this was as a percentage of the total sales tax in the town, so we're pretty confident that we're in the right ballpark. We had about $20,000 of sales tax happening in the Heritage District in 1995. So that's about a 4,000% increase over that period of time. There's a huge difference in what's been happening in this area. There's also a change in market value and improvements. So we have the Heritage District here, and then we have the buffer area. It's not a 1 mile radius because we had to look for where were the streets the same in 1995 that are the same in 2017 so we could have a consistent area. So that's why this is a little bit different shape, is for consistency. So what was happening with the value per acre? In 1995, the Heritage District actually had a higher value per acre than the surrounding buffer area. The 2008 is about the height right before the recession, before we started to see a decline in property value. So at that period of time, the Heritage District had not grown as much in value as the surrounding area had. It was lagging. And then in 2012, which is about the valley of our property tax after the recession, then we can see that both of them declined, but the Heritage District did not decline as much as the surrounding area, so it was starting to see some resiliency or some growth in comparison to the surrounding. And then in this 5-year difference between 2012 and 2017, you can just see the value per acre skyrocket. One of the things to consider here is the town still owns about half of the land in the Heritage District, which means it's not on the tax rolls. And so if you take the town-owned land out, this is about $950,000 an acre. We bump up to over $1 million an acre if you look at just the privately owned properties in the area. So a huge value and growth over time. This is a very simple graph. It looks easy, but we need to say a huge thank you to our GIS team because they put in weeks of time. This is literally the machine on their desk that they pulled 12,000 parcel data from microfiche so that we could get the 1995 data for you. So, like I said, there's a huge iceberg underneath what you're seeing here today. So what is the return on investment? We're going to look at several categories. We're going to look at what the investment is. We're going to look at what the value is. On the investment side, we've obviously spent money with CIP investment. We have economic development staff time. We have water tower maintenance, park ranger, that's additional level of service because this is a high visibility area. And so they spend a little bit more time here than they do in some of our other areas, and we just did the delta. And then what's the parking garage O&M? On the value side, we'll look at sales tax revenue, land proceeds, because we have sold some of the land in the area. What's the building value? We have structures here that could be sold if we wanted to. We're choosing not to at the moment. And then we have land that we can sell as well. So on the investment side, we've spent about $34 million in the Heritage District on investment. Economic development staff time, we have a little bit for water tower maintenance, park ranger. So total, $37 million of investment into the Heritage District area from 1995 to 2017. In comparison to that, the value that we have in the area, we have about $5.86 million of total sales tax revenue over that period of time. We have $4 million of land proceeds so far. The building value comes from the parking garage. We own it. We could sell it to a private vendor who could put a gate up and charge for parking. We choose not to do that. But this is the depreciated value that's on the town's books as of 2017 for what that building or what that structure is worth. That value will obviously go down over time, but we'll also get some sales tax revenue that comes in annually. So over time, that will continue to balance out. This is a snapshot as of 2017. And then we also have $91 million of land, which is a huge number. So I know you're going to want more information on that. So this is land that the town owns in the Heritage District. And we looked at just what is vacant that we could actually sell. Obviously, we're not going to sell the water tower. So we took that out, that we have it, we spent money on it, but we're not including that as value that we could put back out into the community or get from our return on investment. That has more of an aesthetic value to us. But we own like the Heritage Annex. The building is old enough that it's fully depreciated, so the actual building value is not included in here, although if we were to sell it, we would hope to get some money for it. So that's the land that's there. There's 32 acres total in that area. Yes?
We'll go back one slide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the value, but what did we pay? Does that?
That's included in, yep, in the 34 million.
All the purchases of all that?
Yep.
And the CIP investment, does it include all the garages?
It does. It includes, this is through 2017, so Garage 2 is in 2018's budget. When we update the analysis later, then we'll add that into it, both the cost of the garage and the value of the structure that's created from it.
How does the parking garage O&M work as far as 243? Is that the total O&M for the whole life of the garage?
No, for the period of time from 1995 to 2017. So we did it every year and then added it. Yep. So we have the 32 acres, and then we say, what is this worth? We had economic development pulled some comparisons of these are actual sales or in escrow from 2014 to current. We did toss out one that was extremely high because we felt like it was not a good indicator for our purposes. But you can see that they're clustering right around the $65 a square foot. So we figured that that was fair, that that would be a good market analysis or estimate of what our land might also be worth. So you take the 32 acres, simple math, $65 a square foot, and you get $91 million of value that we have in asset. So we have in total about over $100 million of value. We've spent $37 million in investment, so that's a gain of $71 million. So in other words, for about every dollar that Gilbert has spent in the Heritage District, we've earned $3 in return, which is fantastic for economic development. Yes.
I'm here to chat with you about some of the items that are coming soon to the Heritage District and what a place the Heritage District is, and it's been quite a journey. And as we look at some of the items that are coming soon, the growth continues, and we receive inquiries from other communities, from people wanting to come into the Heritage District to occupy office, to come in for retail, to come in for residential. We have a number of communities in the state of Arizona as well as outside of the state of Arizona coming in and talking to us about the sense of place that has been created, the strategy behind this sort of growth pattern as it relates to the Heritage District. And so this item here showcases a 40 square foot office and retail facility on the just south of Vaughn Avenue. Up and down the boulevard, whether it's streets, whether it's people, everyone's sort of living just to find that emotion day and night. And we continue to hear the need for more retail. And so everyone wants that thrill of retail. And what you see here is a small location for what we call micro retail or micro restaurants coming into sort of a market-like concept. And so as you all know, a development agreement has been effectuated on this particular area. And we're working with LGE to on the timelines for coming in. They've completed all necessary permits and reviews, and have gone through the redevelopment commission to get those design approvals. And so we're working with them to talk about when this will begin coming out of the ground. Next, what we're showing here is a 9.1 acre RFP. The RFP is out on the streets. People will be contacting you. They'll be contacting us. They want to know more about what we plan to do with this site. We've started this process with a request for qualifications. So the idea is before we get into some sort of a transactional model or before we release the concept, we want to make sure that developers have the capacity to develop a 9.1 acre mixed use development. The reason I say mixed use is because that's very much in the spirit of our Heritage Village Center zoning category. And so our vision for the site is that somebody would come in and utilize that Heritage Village Center zoning category and begin to build a mixed use project that likely will incorporate some elements of retail, office, residential. While we have some ideas of what the market will bring in, we don't ultimately know what the market will bring in. So what we do know is some will win and some will lose. Next, we've got the 600 stall parking garage, which at the last council meeting you approved the GMP. This is a 600 stall Hearn Plaza parking garage, and the construction has started. So as it relates to construction, we've got about 6 different projects under construction. We've got another 6 construction laydown sites. So as a result, you've got development, you've got interest, you've got things happening, and so it just goes on and on and on and on. The new roadway coming off of Brycomp and Hearn Way will transform the once residential neighborhood into commercial space. And so this gives us sort of that sense of place. So as we're talking with developers and we're showcasing sort of this vision and what the downtown Heritage District will look like, we're asking them to continue to believe in the journey. So I ask you, don't stop believing in the journey. Finally, we were at the Urban Land Institute Trends Day last week, and Gilbert was talked about quite considerably in terms of what was taking place. And an interesting quote came out, and that the private sector will deliver a product. The Urban Land Institute was giving Gilbert accolades is our ability to create that sense of place. That long-term vision for the downtown, for the Heritage District is something that has been lauded through all of the different folks coming into Gilbert, looking at the area, wanting to understand the recipe behind its success. And so I thought that this was a very interesting quote. Again, private sector delivers the successful product, but struggles to deliver the successful place. Our role has been over this 30-year overnight success as sort of delivering that sense of place. And that sense of place is exactly what has caused all of the interest in the Heritage District. And so I commend you and encourage you, don't stop believing.
This one, which is adding an additional step in how we do our funding policy towards PSPRS. So we'll walk through some history on where we're at and where we're going. So we have made a lot of effort in Gilbert to help put money towards our PSPRS unfunded liability. In 2016, we did our employee and employer extra contributions. We did it at the beginning of the year, and then whatever was the difference between budget and actual became some of our contributions. And the result of this effort was about $17,000 in interest, because they had a not very good interest earning year that year. So that was kind of a bust. We kept that policy in place, and we did in 2017 the employee and employer contributions, but they were tighter. We started doing $2 million per year of our ongoing. We added our under over, and then we earned $1.7 million in interest, because PSPRS had a lot better interest earning year in 2017. And so in total, it was $1.3 million towards our unfunded liability. Last year in 2017, we did almost $12 million towards our unfunded liability. 1.7 of that we didn't have to come up with on our own, which is fantastic. That's how we want to keep doing the story moving forward. So the question is, how did that affect our unfunded liability? There are some other things that went on at the same period of time. Before they released their reports, they changed some of the actuarial assumptions. They reduced their assumed earnings rate, so the money that we have in the bank will earn less money over time, which means we as a town are going to have to make up that difference because the employee rates are set. They also increased or updated the mortality tables, assuming people live longer. If people live longer, they're going to need a benefit for a longer period of time, which takes more money. You can see where this is going. So the average contribution rate system-wide increased by 3.3%, and the aggregate funding level decreased from 47 to 46%, meaning unfunded liability is higher. So what was Gilbert's unfunded liability, not just system-wide? Our unfunded liability went from 39 to 38 to 60 because they changed a lot of assumptions there and really trued it up. Our unfunded liability was probably 60 before that, it just wasn't showing on the records. And then with all of our contributions in 2017 and the wonderful work that we did, our unfunded liability decreased by 0.4%, which is a little bit disappointing until you see what everyone else did. So we actually went in the positive and had a decreased unfunded liability. Chandler was the closest, theirs increased by 5%. Everyone else is in the 10 to 15% range. So the work that we did, although our unfunded liability stayed very stable, was actually very, very positive. If you look at the total unfunded liabilities for those same jurisdictions, you can see that we are financially in a much better place than these other jurisdictions. Yes, that is $2.8 billion for Phoenix, so we're very glad that we are not there.
Aren't you glad you're Gilbert, not Phoenix? Everybody's saying,
don't work in Phoenix.
Now you can get angry, Victor.
That's what I'm hearing you say.
Not if you want your retirement checks to cash.
Is there like a per person? Chief, this is what you should be showing the people that are from lateral.
That's why we
Just
said,
to get them
show
here.
this chart
I'm just
right
curious,
here.
like Phoenix has obviously way more.
Phoenix is a larger jurisdiction, but proportionally they're not that much larger. Okay. So what does that mean for 2019 and our rates? So 2018, our police rate, the change is about a decrease in 1% for the police, and then the 1 percentage point. Fire is actually increasing for next year, and the net result is about 0. What we're looking at is we're on track. We're working towards getting everything paid off in about that 5-year period. When we talk about the amortization 20-year versus 30-year, and when you say 20-year amortization, in your mind you think, oh, it just decreases by 1/20th each year and it's this straight line down. But that's not actually how the math works, because there's interest. So if we do a 20-year amortization on $60 million, it actually increases for the first several years, and you get at the highest point $64 million, because you're not paying enough to even cover the interest in this early period of time. If you do it over 30 years, it's even worse. You don't actually start you're continuing to increase your unfunded liability up to $87 million, $88 million, and you don't start decreasing it until about year 19, when your rates go way high and you pay it all off in the last 10 years anyway. So you can see why that is not the approach that Gilbert has chosen to take. We're looking to do that over 5 years, where it really is a depreciation down to get this paid for. That takes about $12 million a year of funding in order to pay that liability off. So we need to be very cognizant of that. That is a stretch. That's going to be difficult. 17, we did about that. 2018, our under-over analysis was only at 2.5, and we were paying off our Hall and Parker cases with cash funding. So we've done good things, but I'm curious to see next November, when the next report comes out, how that works and what the results are. We'll keep monitoring that and moving it forward. Right now, the things that we're doing, we send the contributions, everything on July 1, so they get the higher interest. We remit the budgeted amount, so anything between budget and actual becomes an extra contribution. We do an additional $2 million of ongoing each year. That's just part of the base that we send at the beginning. We do our under-over from the prior year, which some years is more, some years is less. And then what we're proposing today is that we budget using the higher contribution rates. So the police rate actually went down. We would recommend budgeting at the higher rate, since we already have that in the budget from the prior year, and then using the higher fire rate to budget. And then next year, if they, or the year after, if they go down, continue to budget at that higher rate until we get our unfunded liability paid off, because that's already in our personnel base budget. So that is the ask of council, if you are comfortable with us doing that as an additional strategy moving forward to help pay down our unfunded liability.
Favorite subjects. Let's see. Getting going, data-driven decisions. So if you've, a couple of my favorite terms that I've heard in the last year, data is the new oil. My favorite t-shirt, data is the new bacon. And it just seems to be in everything we do, and makes a lot. I've seen them. I would wear it for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Very passionate subject, but if you think about even what we've done this morning, every presentation prior to this, very data-driven, very focused on that. We're using it to make decisions. It helps us be objective. Within Gilbert, IT, and I should say really fire, has been working on an accreditation process that has brought forward a framework for running good operations in the fire department. And then that brings forward a whole bunch of opportunities to engage data. So what you're about to see is really a bunch of information about how we're using data in the fire department. But I really want to focus on, while this is fire, this is an opportunity that is just throughout our organization. So let's take a look. And I'm going to get you oriented real quick. We're going to be seeing a series of maps that shows the history of fire service. So as we look at these maps, you got a station location there in magenta. That bubble that you're seeing, that blue bubble, is a 5-minute and 20-second drive time. So that's the bogey time to receive a call and get a fire truck to a location. We use GIS in order to identify which roads have what speed to drive on. We have preemption, so we have the ability to go through signals, and we've modeled all that out. And you end up with this bubble that shows where a fire truck can actually theoretically make it to in the community in a 5-minute, 20-second drive time. So then the dots. The dots are actual data from actual calls that we've measured. So when you're blue, that means we made it there in under 5 minutes, 20 seconds. When you're yellow, somewhere between 5 minutes, 20 seconds, and 7 minutes. And when you're red, something over 7 minutes. So, and then of course the clustering itself represents the volume of calls. So we're going to take a look at fire service history in Gilbert. And if that's a little hard to see, remember you got screens behind you.
Oh my gosh, Victor, how many times have you guys called?
I don't call those guys.
So a few interesting things to note. When you look in our history back to 2004, half of the town really by design couldn't meet a 5-minute, 20-second drive time. We didn't have fire stations in the right place. And we just weren't built out yet. Community was ahead of us. If you look then at 2005, Fire Station 5 opens, and we gain a bunch of coverage that comes with that. Fire Station 6 opened same year. I think Rob can attest, those were busy years. Lots of stuff going on. But you can see the impact on our ability to deliver service to the community that comes through that. So I advanced a slide, but I just want to keep you oriented. We're looking at 1 year at a time. So we're now looking at 2005 to 2006. So you get to see the impact of building that Fire Station 5 and that Fire Station 6, because the number of red dots start going down, the yellow dots start going down, and we gain confidence that we put the right station in the right place. 2006, Fire Station 8 opens, and Fire Station 1 opens. And so again, our coverage area continues to improve. We now have great service or ability to deliver service, with the exception of that band right there between, Ocotillo and Queen Creek. And so as the community grows, what we'll expect to see is some service shortages that come up in that band. Now we know that the economy took a dip, and so the town growth slowed. We know that through permit information and just intuitively from living in the community. And so we're going to go through a few years here until 2012 where our volume is picking up. We get to kind of see, particularly in the middle part of town right here, that some growth is going to be filling in. And again, remember that dots all just reflect volume. So, and we're going to talk a little bit on maybe some of the things that we can speculate that cause volume, and some of the future things we can look at. Okay. So we're going to get to 2012 here, and if you look up to the northwest part of town, Fire Station 10 opens. And intuitively, when I went through this for the first time, I said, okay, Fire Station 10 has something different driving it than pure volume and location and response. Talking with Chief Badgett, what I began to figure out was this data includes mutual aid data. So a number of the calls up in the northwest part of town, yes, they were responded to on time, but they were being done by a large concentration of MESA units. And so part of this was an agreement between the cities. Okay, we really need to be built and staffed to serve our own. Mutual aid is a great thing, but it shouldn't be by design for large areas. So that's ultimately what led to Fire Station 10 being built. And then the thing you pick up on right away, right? Station 10, Station 7, very close together. An older station and a new station. And we're going to go a couple more years of growth here. And in 2015, we're going to see Station 7 get moved. And so, again, reaching out, saying, okay, there's something different going on here, talking to Bob Badge again. We had a decision as a community. We had an old fire station that we needed to put some capital investment in order to expand, or we could choose to build a new facility, better locate it, be better prepared for the future, better balanced with the calls for service that we know are there. So we moved Station 7. Now this whole time, keep your eyes down in that Queen Creek, Ocotillo, Chandler Heights region of town. That stripe, right, it's gaining.
About those people that
I know, right?
Yeah,
Very
very
important folks there. But you notice this whole time that the volume is picking up in there, so we know that while it used to be sparse and that service coverage maybe not as big a deal, the density is growing and the need for it is growing. And I love what Victor's doing right now, because the great thing about maps, right, is it becomes personal. I know I live right there and I know what my service is, and it's very relatable. So we get 2016-17. Our concentration of red dots is continuing to grow. Thinking of Rod here, we got a big regional park that's coming up in that coverage area. So we are constructing Fire Station 9. I think on our website there's a video camera that shows its construction. You can see it coming out of the ground. I haven't looked at it in a bit, but I know it's going on. But that's where Fire Station 9 is going, and July, October timeframe, when are we scheduling? October for Fire Station 9. Now, one of the things that I picked up on that I thought was interesting when you look at Fire Station 9 in a coverage area, I assumed without the, that our coverage might not be as good right there on the west side of the park. And hey, it actually is having a little more impact than I thought. So we look forward to Fire Station 9 coming. So that is where we are today, but it gives you a good, go ahead, Victor.
What's the problem there on, is that Trilogy still not in the 5-minute possibility?
So
With the future space?
yeah, some of these, Victor, I know I've had some other questions when we looked at these, and we find out that it's things like road network that's not expanded yet, or something of that nature. And so,
On the south side for their facility, so you either have to enter off of Power Road or you have to enter off of Queen Creek. Well, that's, there's only, and then that takes time too. Is
No way to get in there on time.
so
And then you probably do something like
I'm starting to worry about people.
So one of the things, actually, too, Victor, that I love is when we get data out here like this in this format, it allows us to engage conversations that have very clear asks. What is it about this location that is challenging, and allows us to focus on maybe the best way to resolve?
We all know that on the west side, we need the bridge, because there's just no way to get there.
You got it.
It's the east side, yeah, it's weird.
And then there's a little bit this too that, again, as you get into analyses, then the more you realize there are more questions to ask. So one of the other questions you got to consider is, where is that Queen Creek Fire Station at? Where is that Chandler Fire Station at? And how does mutual aid play into this? Where are we helping them? Where are they helping us? What is that balance?
Do we have an ability to find out how many Gilbert addresses are serviced by Gilbert Fire versus, and I'm sure with all the numbers you can use.
Yeah, so one of our benefits of regional dispatch for fire is that it is a data set, and we do get all that information. And so if we wanted to identify, hey, how many calls has Mesa served into Gilbert, and where is it at, and vice versa? Yeah, actually, somewhere I saw one of those, and there was this Scottsdale unit that showed up in the middle of Gilbert, and you're kind of scratching your head a bit, and then we began to realize that when we had the fire, we had Scottsdale units in Gilbert, yeah. So looking forward, what does this do? And this is where the technology piece comes into play a little bit. This information flows into our organization every day. We can load this information into the maps every day. We can watch it on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever our needs might be. So sometimes that's operational, sometimes it's strategic and forecasting. But in our case, what are we watching next year? Certainly the impact of Fire Station 9. Our total call volume per station. So as the community grows and the needs grow, what is the ability for a station to deliver service, and where are we winning and losing is something that we will be able to watch. Certainly the concentration of over 7-minute calls. And this next one goes right to a conversation that we all were having earlier today about police service. I would say, what is our average call by land use? So if we have residential of this density or residential of that density or commercial of this size, what kind of service demand does that draw on? What's average, what's high, what's low? Those are all things we can really start looking into. And then again, looking forward a little bit, change in call type by time. As our community changes and demographics change, will that change our demand for service? We have census data that we can that we can put over this, start doing some analysis by census data. And then looking forward. So we've done a lot of looking back and brought you up to the present, talked a little bit about what we can analyze going forward. But when we do identify that need to add resources, we can start also saying, what specific type of resource do we need to add, and where should it go? How do we get our best bang for the buck for the investment we make and the best service for the community, and do it confidently? So adaptive response units, low acuity, we know what those things do now. We will be able to make some real smart decisions about where we put them. And to that point, this came into my office last week, and I just, wow, that's cool. So 8-minute response time for a fire structure, again through accreditation, 3 engines and a ladder. We have 3 ladders in town, so where we put them counts. And they did this analysis to figure out where to put them. So the orange is how we do business today. 1, 3, and 5 is where our ladders are. The orange represents an 8-minute response time or coverage area. If we were to do 1, 3, and 11, that's what the map looks like. So you lose you lose some, you gain some, and then I'm going to forward again, and same as before, 1, 3, and 11 still on the left side. But 9's coming. What if we put it at 9? And 9 becomes the answer. But here's the number that just made me get up and scream. That results in 5,200 additional homes with ladder coverage within 8 minutes. And we did it by placing a piece of equipment we've already invested in at the right location. So super cool, right? Yeah, and then you begin to ask yourself, okay, how else do we use this going forward? And as I said before, lots of opportunity. Where do we put our energy? Public Works, we're going to be talking some pavement stuff this afternoon. We sent that report out to all of you. We're going to be looking through that data. Facility information, we've grown quickly. How do we take care of it? Same thing for Parks and Rec. And then Patrick hit a little bit this morning on, sensor data gives us the ability to collect information faster than we ever have before. It's going to open up whole new abilities to analyze and make decisions and provide service, and the time on it is going to be so much faster. So with that, I'm going to invite Lori up, and she's going to give us a little glimpse in how we're going to do all that.
A lot of retreats. Yes. It is. Yeah. You're welcome. So I'm giving you one slide, just a little peek into the future, now that you've gotten a taste of the power of data and how data can be used to really make smart decisions. I want to talk about where the future of data is heading. So Mark was sharing with you the data we have today. A lot of it is human generated, just operationally generated. We're starting to mash these things up together and take a look at what does this tell us, and then do data-driven decisions. In the future, we're going to have a number of things that are also going to be producing data. And so that's down on the bottom. You've got devices already in use that are producing data. Our mobile phones are constantly producing data. We've got devices previously inactive, but now intelligent. Watches, cars, light bulbs, street lights, you name it. And then we have devices using connectivity in new ways. TVs, no longer is it you get up and you just turn your channels. Does anybody remember that? It's streaming media. It's a way to connect through Skype, through families. There's whole different uses of those devices that have already been connected in different ways. And then there's completely new devices. The Google Glass came and went, but that's just the beginning of the number kind of innovations. You've got VR that's coming. Think about Google Home and Alexa that are these smart virtual assistants that are coming into our lives. So the net is that this is not going away. We're getting more and more things in the part of the Internet of Things that are going to produce data. Our citizens are using it, businesses are using it, we're going to have cars coming in and driving on our streets that are using it. And all of it actually needs to be powered by data. As Mark was mentioning, some people say, well, data is the new oil. What they're really saying is it's really the fuel that's going to fuel a lot of these things. I like the bacon. Who doesn't like bacon? That's a really good one. I need that t-shirt. So what's going to happen is we're going to start to take a look at how does that human and operational data that we're already starting to make sense of, make use of, make valuable, how does that click down on top of this whole nother layer of data that's going to come into our environment? And that's some of the things that we're starting to work on. We're starting to think about that. What does that data mean? It's going to be a different meaning than we've had in the past. So the data maps and the use of the data that Mark was showing you it's static data that we bring together. We make a decision over a period of time. The data and the things that need data to power them are actually going to start to need data that's not only connected, but start to do predictive modeling And that predictive modeling needs to also drive prescriptive action in real time. So let's take a car, autonomous vehicle as an example. Driverless cars are, what the driver is, are algorithms. And it's using data in order to make those real-time, snap in a second decisions of where to turn, where to stop, where to avoid a pedestrian, et cetera, et cetera. And that they're not alone. So all these other devices are going to be brought up and made powerful by the use of that data in very real-time, prescriptive, action-oriented fashion. So Mark talked a little bit about just some of the things as we think about things that go out there at the edge of this network. Sensors, taking a look in our water pipes, taking a look for brakes, street lamps. If something goes out in a street lamp, instead of us over time taking a look at the data and then making a response maybe a week later, we can actually start to make these responses real time. So think about the power of that for our citizens and for our community. There are also, above and beyond just technology kind of decisions, we also have to think about the impact of policies, privacy laws, all those things as well too. And so we are taking into account those things as we're starting to build out what does this framework look like and how do we start to leverage this power of this additional data that's coming into our town. So that's just a preview. Stay tuned as we build this out, build out the framework. What does this mean? What does this look like? What's the path to really get there, which will be a part of our innovation strategy and roadmap to be delivered at the end of June. So any questions for Mark or myself at this time?
This next one is talking about development services fee update. And the ask here is, should we update the development services fees? Big shout out to Kyle and his group and Nicole from OMB, the analyst who is working on these. They've put a lot of thought and work into getting this data together for us today. So the historical perspective, we updated development services fees in 2001. We updated them again in 2008, which was more of a index based off of cost of living, off of CPI. As much as 6%. Historical knowledge from the group is it was closer to 3% on a lot of the development services fees. And this is the point in time where we added the pre-application fee of about $200 that was added to the schedule. So it's been almost 10 years. Well, it has been 10 years since we've done anything significant with the development services fees. Obviously, some things have changed over time. So instead of a tale of two cities, this is a tale of 10 fees. We'll go through 10 fees. You can count them if we get lost in the middle. We're going to start with the building valuation tables. So the building permits are based off of a valuation table, and those tables that we're currently using are from 1999. As you would imagine, if you go to sell your house, you're not going to call the appraiser and say, hey, can you give me the value as of 1999 for what you think my house is worth? That would not be wise. So most of the other jurisdictions around are using the 2017 ICC tables. And we're recommending that we would go to that. The same house, the very same house, and if we use the 1999 tables, would say it's worth $59 a square foot. Same house, 2017 tables say it's worth $116, which intuitively values have gone up over time. What we see is if we increase the value of the projects that we're working on, then we also need to decrease the cost per $1,000 in our building permit fee because our goal is to remain revenue neutral for this fee. And so that's the balance of how do we structure the fees to get that goal in mind. This is a whole lot of text. This is
a lot of emotions I'm dealing with right here.
Stay with us. So we're asking for.
Just don't call me a customer and I will be fine, okay?
This is a whole lot of text. This is our current fee. It starts out, if your permit is for something that's going to be worth $1 to $1,000, it's $37 is the fee to come in. What we're proposing is that would go up to $68, recognizing that $37 doesn't actually buy the staff time of the customer service and the technical look at your building plans and permitting, and so we're subsidizing it at that lower level. So there is a little increase there. Small dollar amount, but large percentage because it's such a small amount. And then the fees go up. This table matches more what our regional peers are. Right now, because the valuations are so small, our fee only says, well, if it's $100,000 or more, because that was such a large amount of money when we put the table in place. Well, that doesn't really cover the value of projects that we do today in Gilbert. And our regional peers are saying, yeah, we're saying $1 million and up, not $100,000 and up. So let's translate this into what it really means and do some comparisons. The comparison would be for a single family home. Under the 1999 tables, it would say that home is worth $188,000. That same home using the 2017 tables is really worth $371,000. So we've decreased with the fee valuation up, value or fee per valuation down. So we would be within $5 on a single family home so that the fee would be the same, and you can see that here. Our other jurisdictions, I'm not sure what they're doing, but they must be spending a lot of time that we're not putting into our process because their fees are a whole lot more, or they're subsidizing their other operations with their building permits. So our recommendation is just revenue neutral. Let's look at another example, an office building. Old 1999 valuation, $7.4 million, 2017 valuation, $15 million. And we're within $100 there, $50 of being the same. So trying to keep everything very, very revenue neutral. Restaurant is a little bit different because their valuation changed differently in comparison to the rest. So they went from $700,000 to $1.3 million. So their fee actually goes down just slightly. So if there are those quirks in the valuation where some went up or down, not a uniform increase, there will be some bubbles like that. Okay? So that is building permit. We're going to go on to fee 2, unless questions. Okay. Residential swimming pool. Right now we're charging $300. When we looked at the actual staff time it takes to provide that service, it's actually $324 of time. That is, compared to our regional peers, very much in line with what we're seeing, so we would recommend increasing to that $324 for cost recovery. Standard home review. So this is after the initial plan has already been reviewed, and this is, we want copycat number 2 and 3 and 4 to build, but we've already done the detailed. Right now it's $37. You can imagine that's not covering the cost of staff time anymore. So we would recommend $68. Again, a large percentage increase, small dollar amount increase, and it's still low compared to our regional peers. Okay. Engineering plan review. So right now we charge 2 different fees. If it's up to 20 pages, 21 or more pages, a different fee. We're not seeing that in our regional peers as a cost structure. And when we talk to our experts internally, they're like, it takes the same amount of time for a sheet, whether it's sheet 20 or sheet 21. So we just want to go to a flat per sheet. The actual cost, if we look at our staff time, is $324 per sheet. So we looked at all the time that was spent, divided it by the number of sheets that we did in 2017 to figure that out. So we would recommend, it's still low compared to our regional, but it would represent our cost recovery. Fees for the regional peers are a lot all over the board. And this process isn't necessarily similar across all of the jurisdictions. So those jurisdictions that have like processes and those that have similar are those that have similar comparable fees. So those that have lesser fees are not really doing a like process according to the research that the planning department was able to do on this. Design review amendment. So right now we're charging $615. Our actual cost for staff time to provide that service is $2,700. So this is showing that that's very different. But the footnote here is that jurisdictions that don't have a fee, they don't have a separate fee. You go through the full process again. And we're saying there is a staff time reduction for the amendment that we would like to recognize, but it still is more than we're currently charging for that service. The pre-application fee, we're currently charging the $200 that we put in place in 2008. Our actual staff cost is the $2,500, almost $2,600. We are recommending that that be $300 though. What it is, and I'm going to give a brief description, and then I'm going to point at Kyle because he knows this service. I do numbers, he does service. This helps reduce the number of questions and problems that we have when we go through the actual process. And so this helps reduce the staff time on the back end and is a benefit both to the customer and to us. Our fear is if we charge the full amount that people will quit using the service and it will cause us more work and issue on the back end. We're going to switch and talk about our utility funds. We talked about them last year. We've done some work and we're ready with some information for you. So with the enterprise rates, we're going to ask, do you want us to proceed? That's going to be the goal.
That's what your final question is.
Yes. We also have some decision points kind of along the way. So I'll try and signpost and give you good information where we're at. And we'll have Eric Brown. He's been doing a huge heavy lift on this and helping keep everything organized and moving forward. And we'll have him help present towards the end as well. So our goals today, we're going to talk about the health of the funds. Then we're going to talk about some proposed structure changes. Then we're going to talk about how those structure changes compare with our region, how it would affect our customers. And then we're going to talk about what is the outline for a process moving forward. We are going to, because there are 4 funds that we're looking at, I'm giving you good information now because it's going to get a snowball, an avalanche of information. Just be prepared. We're going to talk about water, wastewater, environmental service, residential, and in that is the environmental compliance programs. And then we're going to talk about environmental service commercial. So water, sewer, trash, commercial trash. And we go in that order in each of the sections. So that'll help us keep organized. First thing we want to look at is what has been the inflation. We have not adjusted our water or wastewater rates since 2009, July 1, 2009. So this is the line. It's been steady. CPI, Phoenix CPI over this period of time has increased 16%. So we've done a really great job of keeping our rates level for a long period of time. Environmental service commercial actually had a decrease in 2012, and so it's had a 7.5% decrease over this period of time.
CPI stands again
Consumer Price Index?
for? It's inflation.
Inflation. Yep. So kudos to our teams who have been working really hard to keep our costs down. In the water fund, if we continue to do our current level of service and practices, and we've talked about this before, the fund does not have sufficient resources for its needs. The red line in these graphs is the minimum fund balance, and then the lines behind represent what the fund balance would be over time. So we are going to go below minimum fund balance is where we're headed. We are now at a decision point. We're like 6 slides in, wanted to keep it interesting. In the water fund, the water supply has had declining quality. The North Water Treatment Plant has a chemical feed enhancements that would help to better treat the variability in the incoming water supply. It's a $14.3 million project. We would anticipate construction towards the end of this 5-year rate look in order to save up and cash fund over time. I'm going to look at Jessica for additional information on that project because, again, I do numbers, I don't do water treatment. And of course, I did right as she took a bite.
Robin eggs. This is some recommended improvements at our North Water Treatment Plant, which is our SRP water treatment plant that was the source of the TTHM issues that we had over the summer. Long term, these enhancements would allow us more capacity to treat the continuing water changes in water quality and the long-term degradation that we're expecting in that water supply. So we're doing some other things in the interim to address more immediate needs, but this would be a long-term provide us the most flexibility at that plant to continue to adapt to water quality changes.
Okay, any questions on that project before we move to the next slide? What this means is if we keep current operations, we're going to need a 5.5% increase in the water fund. If we include the water quality project and do the chemical feed system, then we need to do 11.5% increase. If we want to keep up with the inflation adjusted rate, then we would do a 16% increase. Staff recommendation is to do the 11.5% increase. We have each of those modeled throughout the presentation. It gets a little bit clunky, so if you give me kind of an indication about breeze past one or two of those, it will shorten some slides that we can buzz.
She's saying, let's give her 2 paths to go through so we don't go through all 3 paths.
Yeah. Is there one of these that we can eliminate?
Correct.
You said the top one?
Okay.
When I raise them, I mean, I'm almost like,
To be responsible for financial
it's like, to me, look at, the one that's at 5.5 and then show me what the issues are with it.
Okay.
And you can sell me to go up higher.
Okay.
And that's how I look at it.
You're hitting all 3. Hit it.
We're doing all 3. Got it.
Do all 3, I guess.
So be thinking we are going to need some consensus moving forward because we need to give our consultant some direction on where we go. Okay, wastewater. Remember, we're talking water, wastewater, residential trash, then commercial trash. This also is not a surprise, and wastewater is really the one that's driving this because we really need to do something even for next year with the wastewater fund. 9.25% increase in fiscal 19 is what we're recommending. Remember that is still below the 16% inflation, so we're lagging what even inflation would be. Again, doing efforts on the wastewater side to keep cost containment in place, which we continue to do. On environmental service residential, this is the fund that has our environmental compliance programs, which is stormwater and air quality. If we look only at the environmental service residential, only trash collection and the rates for trash, we have sufficient money. In fact, we have a little bit more, but we don't have enough money to do trash and environmental compliance using only the trash rates. So we have 2 options. We can have environmental compliance pay its full amount and have a fee that pays for that, and then we would reduce the trash rates to offset that we're not subsidizing that way. Or we can keep the trash rates the same for consistency and only charge an environmental compliance rate for the delta that we need to make the fund in general self-sufficient. Okay? So what that looks like when we put numbers to it is full environmental compliance fee is $4.28 on every utility account. And then we would decrease the residential trash rates by $1.20 or per month. Or we can do the partial environmental compliance fee, which would be $3.15 across all of them, and then keep the environmental service residential fees the same. Okay. We have both of these modeled. You can give us be thinking about what preference you have on that one as well. Okay. Then we have the 4th one, the Environmental Service Commercial Fund, and this is needing an 8% increase to be able to keep fund balance. We have a couple of projects, some trash compactors that are going to play into that. So there's really not an excess in fund balance. This is getting revenues, ongoing revenues, and ongoing expenditures matching. But there is a little bit of fund balance from the past. So with that, I'm going to have Eric talk through some of the rate structuring and reserve the right to jump in whenever. Eric's done a fantastic job of helping write herd on this project as I've bounced around on some other things.
So thank you. So Kelly talked to you about the big picture. What I'm going to talk to you about is how do we get there? and what that looks like. Some of these cost of service drivers are outside of our control. Councilmember Cook, you already mentioned CAP delivery rate. That's risen 58% since the last time we've raised our rates. And it looks like it's going to go up by another third over the next 5-year period. So we can't really control some of those costs. Growth and plant expansions, and then asset maintenance as well. The loss of Navajo Generating Station that you see in front of you is a big piece of that picture, because that's what provides the energy to get us our water to us. And so there's a lot of things that are outside of our control that are in flux in our future.
Look how dirty that area is. No wonder they had to shut down. That's so ugly. Sorry.
Sure.
Is that the cost of coal?
It's the cost of
so
coal.
expensive compared to natural
It
gas?
actually didn't become an air quality issue. It became more of a cost of actual product.
Well, originally,
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, Victor? They said that they can get cheaper power now through APS. And APS can supply the power for the whole CAP grid cheaper than NGS can.
Who knew that that power and water were so tightly connected? So these are our guiding principles for the rate design that we went over last year, but I wanted to remind you all of them. The customer service, delivering that same excellent level of customer service. We want to make sure that each of these funds are able to operate without subsidy from other funds. And then within that is equity among customer classes. So to the best degree we can, we want to also be able to make sure that folks who cause a cost are paying for that cost. If we can, we want to promote efficient use of these resources, and then also maintaining a simplicity of structure is something we kind of went back to this time around. Last year was very confusing, I think. As a reminder, on the water side, there are two components to the rate. There's a base fee, which is essentially a capacity charge that is steady throughout the year, and then there's the volumetric charge, which fluctuates based on how much water you use. And so under our 16% increase, which actually I think we took off the board, so let's move to the 11.5% increase. Our current rates are in that second column. The 3/4 inch meter is the one that 90% of our residents have. That's where most of our meters are, so you might want to focus your attention there. Our proposed rate is just to change that by 11%, by $1.50. One thing we did with these meter base fees is that we adjusted the proposed rate to match the actual capacity of that meter. Currently, they don't do that, and so to align that,
Standard to have that alignment.
yeah, it's engineering. This is math that is an engineer's math. So we just align that for that actual use, and that's why they're not all uniform change in percentage. And then we'll adjust that for the 5.5% increase. So you can see for our residents, it would be an 82-cent change. So not a big difference. Under the volumetric change, let me just move that to the 11.5% increase. So currently, this is a change that we propose. This residential structure is the same for everyone, whether or not you're a resident. But we'll focus on the residents currently. It's 10,000 gallon increment blocks, and then for each 10,000 gallon increment, the price goes up. So if you start to use 45,000 gallons, you're paying for that last 15,000 gallons at that top rate. We propose to align this block structure more with current use. Back 20 years ago when these were developed, 10,000 gallons, your first block increment was the typical indoor water use. Because of efficiency, now we see 8,000 gallons for a basic health and safety volume is more appropriate. And so we're proposing to move that first block down just a little bit, 8,000 gallons, so that if you're using water efficiently in your home, you get the lowest rate. And then what the rates look like for the rest of this scenario under the 11.5% increase. It's a small increase on the lower rates and a little bit higher on that top tier, recognizing that that top tier is discretionary water use out in the landscape. Gilbert does not get the benefit of recycling that water. And so it's a resource that is used once and is gone. It's more expensive.
So we know that we're going to need to purchase more water rights into the future, and we can delay that if we start to use less water with our current household. So you'll see that theme throughout all of the structures of having that top tier. Recognize that that's outdoor water usage that we lose. It never comes to the sewer. It never gets treated. It never becomes part of our reclaimed system where we either sell it to our HOAs and parks and golf courses, or we recharge it into the ground and get credits that offset the amount of water that we need long term.
And so I'll show you what this looks like under the 5.5% increase. You can see, of course, they're a little bit lower than the 11%. So what does that look like for your average resident and comparison to our neighbors? Currently, Gilbert, we're at the bottom. And under a 5.5% increase, we're still at the bottom. Under the 11.5% increase, we're just barely scraping past Chandler into second place in the region.
They're raising theirs this year.
They raise them almost every year in Chandler. Small amounts, but
But we love Chandler.
we love them. Yep.
Disclaimer again, I just wanted to love Chandler. Let you know this might not stay.
So as you can see, we're very competitive. We offer this service for an extremely great value. The non-residential piece, currently in Gilbert, they follow that residential tiered system. And as we discussed last year, it doesn't make a lot of sense to charge a non-resident under the same structure. Some of our comparison cities have gone to a different structure where they have a flat rate for those users, and that's what we're actually proposing here. So you can see currently they're under this residential structure. If we move to the 11.5% increase, we propose to put that rate at $1.60. So they're below that top tier, but their use is pretty consistent. And this is on the indoor piece, okay? So we're getting this water back under most scenarios.
So who pays this amount? You're saying non-residential indoor, who pays this?
Commercial, school,
Yeah, anyone using water indoors, they flush the toilet. That's just not,
Golf, main event.
yes,
Schools
everybody.
currently more at the $1.80 because of the quantity that they're.
Yes,
So they
yes.
still see.
So there's an equity,
Big
yes.
schools that
Mhm.
pick up on it.
Yes. So the non-residential indoor water use will actually see a decrease on their water bill under most scenarios.
non-PA, two-person accounting firm, they would see an increase because they're using a very small amount of water. Most of our commercial is using into the higher end, and so they would see a decrease on the water. Mon-PA, although seeing an increase, it would be a small amount because they're using fewer number of gallons. It's a smaller dollar. It's 50 cents, 52 cents between the
What
two.
about their outdoor piece? Are there two different meters? What am I missing?
Yes, under almost all new development typically has a domestic meter, which we charge the sewer rate to, and then a landscape meter that they don't charge the sewer rate to. So it's a benefit to them. So we're actually proposing, we do not currently have a landscape rate. So that's actually one of the next slides, is that we're proposing that we should have a landscape rate. And we're proposing to match this to that top residential tier. So under the 11.5% increase, we're going to match the landscape rate for a non-residential user to that residential top tier that I mentioned before. It's all discretionary outdoor water use. We lose that resource. This water costs us more because we don't get the benefit of the recycling use of it. So that was 11% increase, and then the 5.5% increase. You've seen that rate under the residential piece before. So there's an equity issue here because everyone beforehand was paying the top tier rate essentially because they used a lot of volume if you're a high volume user. So what does this look like for some of your, these are actual customers of ours, and you'll notice the real takeaway here is that there's a premium on the landscape water use. And that goes to our goal of using a conservation mindset and encouraging folks to use less of that water if possible.
One thing I want you to caution on is remember that this is water only. When you get your bill, it comes water, sewer, trash. So later after we talk about the sewer, we're going to show you what the combined is, because that makes the difference where some go up and some go down. What's the combined result?
Okay. The hydrants currently pay that top tier rate of $1.80. We dug into the analysis on this, and they have a high peaking factor, which means when you turn on a 6-inch water hydrant to fill a truck, a water truck for dust control or grading or some other construction, you turn it on and it comes out at how many gallons per minute? 3,000? A lot? Not quite that much? A lot. So that kicks on booster pumps in our system. There's an added cost there. So we're proposing to make this a cost of service rate right here. And so what that looks like is a pretty high increase. These are one-off users, typically, who are doing a construction project in Gilbert.
So this does represent their impact to our system. It is a small group of users that is a large increase. If you were to want to subsidize this to have less of an increase, then it would have a small impact on the overall rates for everyone else to pick up that subsidy. It's an option, but we wanted to model if they are truly paying for their own impact to the system, this is what it would be.
Now we're going to move into the dirty water, the wastewater. So currently we have got the residential base rate and a volumetric variable fee. And the way we calculate that fee is based on winter water use during 3 months, January, February, March bills. And then we deduct a portion of that and we say only 70% of that is going to actually go down the drain. And then we charge you that rate the entire year. So it's highly variable. We propose to move to a flat base rate. If you're a resident and you're attached to the sewer, you have that access. It just costs money. It doesn't matter how much you put down there, really, because there's not that much variation between residents in how much water they put down the drain. But the way that we're currently charging for it, it does create that variance. Because if you're a large home, or if you've got a large acre lot and you're irrigating that throughout the winter, we're charging you for that sewer use that really doesn't happen. Conversely, if you live alone and you have a small lot, you don't have much landscaping, you're not really paying the full cost for your access to the sewer. So we propose to just move to a flat base rate, flat fee for access to the sewer for residential.
This is mainly because there's not 2 meters where we can.
That's exactly why.
Indoor and outdoor use.
Right, yes. On the non-residential side, we don't have a base fee, and we only charge a variable rate based on the actual water use that month for the domestic meter. And so this is the opposite of the homeowner problem. If you are the small business who has, if you're the real estate office and you have no landscaping and you have a toilet in there and you use 2,000 gallons a month, you pay $4 for access to our entire sewer infrastructure. So you're not paying your share. So we propose to add a base rate, but keep the variable rate. Because we add the base rate, we spread more of the costs out, and the variable rate, even under a 9% increase, comes down. It's more equity. So what does this actually look like? For our residents, the bill for your wastewater keeps us right in the middle of the pack, but it's not variable anymore, so customers know what that rate will be throughout the year. For our non-residential customers, if you're a large volume user, your actual wastewater rate is going to come down because now you're spreading some of those costs among everyone more equitably. Conversely, if you're like that elementary school that has several meters, now you're charging that base fee, and so their rate's going to come up a little bit. The equity proposition.
Can you show, sorry.
Sure.
What's the comparison on those hydrant meter rates with other jurisdictions? It's a big increase, and I'm curious how.
It is, yeah. We can pull that together. We don't have a slide for that. They are highly variable. So for our non-residential customers, I guess this slide didn't get updated. We put these together. So now you can see the variation there. The water and wastewater bill. Some of them, they come down. Some of them, they go up. Some of them, they come out equally, even at that 11% water rate increase. So this is the water rate increases with the combined sewer rate increases as well.
So this is one of the reasons why I would really recommend going to that 11%, because it helps so that there's not a decrease this year and then an increase into the future. So if you look at some of the like high school domestic, there would be, this is our current rate, if we only did the 5.5%, they would actually have a decrease, whereas the 11 would keep them very similar. So it creates a better smoothing over time for some of those customers.
Okay. And then for our residents, what's the actual impact to them? We're at the bottom, we still win, right? Combined water, wastewater bill. Gilbert is still, even under the 11.5% increase, that's the stat.
Not the sewer, the bill, but the water.
Yeah. Excellent value for the service. And then there's always the question about how does this impact the schools? So we modeled them separately. This should be pretty accurate based on their 2016 water use. Water and wastewater bills. We can see that under the 11.5% water increase, school districts, because they're large domestic water users, they don't see an 11.5% increase. All districts combined, it's more along the lines of 9.5% total. So it's it doesn't treat them unfairly. Okay. So now reclaimed water. Reclaimed water has the same base and base rate and then a volumetric rate. The base rate is very low. We don't propose to change that. But under the direct reclaimed delivery, so we've got 3 different types of reclaimed water delivery that we have. The direct users are actually hooked up to our pipe system. We deliver water to their lake or their reservoir, and then they use the water. We currently are subsidizing that rate from the wastewater users. We propose to move it up to 40 cents per 1,000 gallons from 32, which does not seem like a lot, but remember that these are very high volume users who might use 1 million gallons a month. So that's going to be a big impact. However, the cost to deliver that service is more like 44 cents per 1,000 gallons. So they're still going to be receiving some benefit from the other users on the system.
It's still a lot less expensive
Than potable water. It's about, yeah, it's about a
It is less
fifth.
expensive, and our other option is to continue to subsidize their use of the reclaimed water and have to get new water rights to make up for it.
Okay.
Any place we can eliminate the need to acquire more water, given how A, difficult this process is, and B, how expensive it's continuing to rise. Anytime we can encourage conservation because of the cost of water, everybody wins.
This is a large increase. It will hit HOAs, golf courses, and the town parks, so internally. But we feel like it's a more equitable way to move forward given the constraints of what we would need if we continue to use water at that rate.
The second rate is the recovered reclaimed from a customer-owned well. So these are customers like Power Ranch or Agritopia who have a well on site. We don't have reclaimed infrastructure in their area. What we do is we recharge the reclaimed water into the aquifer. They withdraw it with their well. Okay? So there's a few of them out there. We propose to move that rate up to 80 cents per 1,000 gallons. And then the recovered reclaimed under a Gilbert-owned well. So these are wells that we own. There's only a handful of them that actually operate under this scenario, moving that rate up 14 cents.
Those both directly use our credits.
Yeah. So there's a recognition in there that the value of the credit that they withdraw has a larger value to us. And then environmental services residential. Council gave us the direction last year to do some sort of a fee for those environmental compliance programs that we have to administer. And so Kelly mentioned the two options that we're proposing. One is to charge the full fee, a full fee to all utility customers, whether or not they're residential or non-residential. Under that scenario, we'll reduce the trash rate by $1.20 and then charge everyone a $4.28 fee. Under the partial fee, we leave the residential rate the same. The environmental compliance fee moves down to $3.15. So you can see there's a little bit of a difference for the residential customer because under the full fee, we're spreading that out over everyone instead of just the residents.
Okay. So touch on the IT or the GIS piece of this a little bit. We started a new practice a few years back of going through our road inventory and not just trying to estimate how much we have by length and width math, but actually creating a GIS layer that traces the boundary of all of our pavements. So that accounts for turnout lanes, double turn lanes, right turn lanes, tapers, all the kind of oddities that happen in a street network, and really gives us a very accurate count of how much do we have and what kind do we have. So how much do we have? That's the big question, right? Here's an attempt to visualize 20 million square yards. Yeah, okay, that's tough. A little better, 6.4 square miles. Yeah, so push all the parking lot, or push all the roads together, create a great big parking lot, 6.4 square miles. Another way to look at it is 8.3% of our town boundary, including county pockets and right-of-way and all that good stuff. Or if you want the visual view of it, that's what that big parking lot would look like. Baseline to Guadalupe, Power Road to somewhere between Gilbert and Cooper. Yeah, it's a big number.
Get a lot of pickleball courts on that, Rod. I'm telling you, I can program that.
Yeah, yeah. When it snows, I can't remember where I heard this from. When it snows, it's a great place to do donuts. So, maintenance techniques, and so lots of help from the streets team on this. But this is based on real-world experience, Gilbert operations, the way we maintain roads. These are the various maintenance techniques that we apply to our road system. So, crack seal, right? Draw the lines out there, fill up the cracks. Fog seal is kind of that light coat of oil that goes over top of the road. Add some small rock or aggregate to it. That's your slurry seal. Micro seal, little better oil and mixer to that. And then you get into overlays. Overlays have some different thicknesses. Some of them we have to grind the edges. And then a surface reconstruct and a base reconstruct. So when a road's put down, there's really kind of two levels of construction of that road cross section. And there's a base layer that's put down that's covered by surface layer. And so you have some options when you're repairing the road as to how deep you go into that cross section when you're reconstructing. So give you some ideas of square yard costs. And in order to bring this all down to something we can all conceptualize, we're going to focus on maintaining a single square yard of pavement. So 3 feet by 3 feet, what does a life cycle look like? So we took a look at really 3 major scenarios. What is the no maintenance scenario? So we're going to build it, we're going to wait till it's falling apart, we're going to rebuild it. What's that timeline look like? What's that cost look like? We're going to look at a some maintenance scenario, something in the middle, and then we're going to look at what we're doing today. So if we assume that we do nothing in terms of maintenance, the estimate is that we get 20 years or so out of that investment. And then because we've done no maintenance on it, it will have eroded to the point where we're going to have to strip it all the way down and rebuild it base and surface level up. Putting that focus on a single square yard, that's kind of how the cash flow comes out of that. So $80 over 40 years, $2 a square yard is what you end up with per year. Everybody with me?
Yep.
Okay. There's what your road looks like. So there's the other piece of this is okay, I have a quality component of this. I'm driving on this road. It's deteriorating over that time. What's the condition look like ultimately when it's being replaced, and how long have I driven on it? So this is an actual road, Claxon Road's out south. That's a picture from an actual road condition assessment that we've done in Gilbert. So that's all real stuff. And it looks like that was dated in 2014.
That's the Ray's Road. Gordon Ray's.
That's what I was
Claxon.
Well, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. All right. See, I told you it was real. All right. So we're going to shift gears. We go into some maintenance. So we estimate that we can reduce some of our costs by putting in a micro seal. So thin layer oil and some aggregate that we put on that. Say we put it in at year 10, cut that life cycle out. And then you'll notice at year 20, instead of a base reconstruct, we're talking a surface reconstruct. So we think our bet is if we do that maintenance like that, we'll be able to do a less severe reconstruction at year 20. And then we're going to do another one of those micro seals at year 30, some additional maintenance, keep more of the water out of that, and that we can get to about 45 years out of that. So if we run those costs together, add in the micro seal costs, you get down to $66 total over a 45-year period, $1.47 per year per square yard.
Did you put any CPI in this, or is this just today's cost?
These are just today's costs, Rod, yeah. So the math gets hard. When you add time value of money math, then it gets really hard. But yeah, so good point. Just simple dollars.
Mark, one more question. Did you also take into account higher volumes of traffic on the roadways, or is this just looking at today's volumes stagnant?
Yep, today's volumes as we're accustomed to. And Curtis, anything to add to that? Good? Okay. All right, so some maintenance, what's that road look like at the end of 20 years? So you don't have that severe cracking, but you still got some substantial work to do. You still have some water coming into the lower layers of the pavement. And so again, Mission Ave and Sherry Drive, these are some examples of actual pavement assessments that we've done here in Gilbert. All right. So then we're going to take a look at what we do now. And I should say this is something that Streets Crew has used as their guide for quite some time. We do fog seal at year 3, another seal at year 6, a heavier seal at year 11, year 17, and then we stretch it out, and instead of grinding and removing at year 23, we're putting an overlay down. So we're just putting additional material on. And then we follow that same pattern around again. A couple of fog seals, a couple of micro seals, and there's a big item going on there at 45. Because we've taken care of it, we've proportioned out what we think happens at 45 years. 50% of that road will be an overlay, a thicker overlay, but an overlay still, less costly maintenance. Surface reconstruct for about 25% of that. So depending on how it was built, depending on the heavy of traffic, depending on exposure, there's a lot of variables go into 45 years. The assumption is a surface reconstruct for 25%, and then a base reconstruct for the other 25%. And really the reason for that is we've taken care of it, we've kept the water out of the base over a 45-year period, we have less severe problems at the end. So if you put some cash flow to that, again, single yard of pavement, 94 cents per year per square yard. That is how we operate today. So if you think about the roads that you drive on, this one is easy to explain. The experience that you all have in Gilbert driving around, old parts of town, new parts of town, this is more or less what you get. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Here's where the challenge comes. This is, we took the GIS, we took every road in town, we tagged it with its construction date, and then we took a draft of how quickly the town built. And so one of the things you realize right away, right? 1.8 million square yards of pavement in the year 2002. The data guy in me says, what in the world happened in 2002? And what we did in 2002 was we built a whole bunch of arterial roads. Arterial roads, of course, 5-6 lanes wide, depending on where you're at, adds lots of area to the network. So this is where we scale up from 1 square yard and we start talking 20 million square yards. Now the prices that I just went through with you are arterial roadways. The costs are a little bit less when you talk collector roadways and a little bit less when you talk residential streets. That's been accounted for in this graph. So for the sake of keeping presentation kind of concise and simple, but as you look at blue, yellow, or orange and gray in there, it's a little busy. But that represents your arterial, collector, and residential roads and the costs going with each. And then the average. So you'll see 2 averages up there. In this case, this is the no maintenance. So this is your highest cost per unit estimation. Had we had a crystal ball back in 2000 and been able to estimate how we were going to grow and start setting aside money early, we could have saved $33 million a year and been on pace for that maintenance path. Now, reality is we haven't been doing that, so if you look at the average going forward, that's the top line, 36 million. Of what you've seen so far with unit costs, right? I think you know where this is going. We could bring that down by doing some maintenance to 23 million, and because we didn't start saving early, 25 million. Here's where we're at, though. This is recommended cash flow. This is do the right maintenance, get good quality of roads, and do it at the lowest cost. And so had we had that crystal ball, $15 million, had we set that aside as budget starting in 2000, saved what we didn't use for maintenance and had it sitting in the bank ready to go, we could be at $15 million a year. If we start today, we'd have to put aside 16.6, save what we don't use, and have it ready for those big years that you see out there, 2047, right? 45 years from 2002. Everybody with me? Questions? Okay. So the takeaway, this is very rare, right? This is like just doesn't happen very often. You get the best roads at the lowest cost, and so doing the recommended maintenance is kind of the conclusion that comes out of the analysis.
So we've got our takeaway. So for our streets funding, our revenue sources are twofold currently. We have HERF money, which comes from the gas tax, and that is dedicated money we have to spend it on roads. And then there's VLT money, the vehicle license, that comes. It is not technically earmarked, it is general revenues, but for our purposes, we have put them in with streets, knowing that streets is underfunded and needs the additional funding. What do we do with this money? There are several services. Pavement maintenance is what we're talking about today. And we had to take one step forward, and so we put our step at pavement maintenance. It is the black stuff on the roads. But there is more to roads than just the black part, the pavement. And so there are other things that the streets fund takes care of, like street lights, traffic signal operations, sidewalk and concrete, your curb, gutter, all of that type of stuff, and your landscaping plus other road hazards and lots of other things.
When we say landscaping, it's just the parts the HOAs don't maintain, which is a small
Right, or
percentage, correct?
median, or, yeah. I'm getting a nod from the technical expert behind you too, so we're good.
It's about 2 million square feet, so it's not a small number.
But as far as the percentage of right-of-way of the town, it's pretty small. Isn't it under 10%?
Probably.
Okay. The other thing that we pay out of this money are HERF bonds from about 20 years ago that we did to construct some new and additional roads. So when we put that together, what does the actual look like? This is our spending that we've done in the past, and the numbers represent the blue, the pavement, which is our focus today. And then there's about $3.4 million of red, which are debt service payments. So you can see that fiscal 17 and back, we're very far short of the 16.5 million that would be our average. And so that's part of the reason why we've seen some of those reconstruct projects come into the bond funding, where we've been pulling them out and working not to do that, but there are a few that have been in there. And that's because this has been underfunded and not able to support proper maintenance of those during that period of time. We have some beneficial things moving forward. Fiscal 19 is the last year of our HERF bond payments. Yay, they finish. And so when those go off, then there will be more money to be able to spend on the repair and replacement of our pavement. And so in fiscal 20, we should have that $16.5 million that we project we need. What this doesn't answer is the gold enough for what's happening in those? Is it enough to do our streetlights? That has to be our next step, or phase 2 of the project, is double checking that we have full capacity in that area as well. We don't know the answer to that at this point. But to be honest, our whole work group was really surprised when we came out and found fiscal 20, we're actually meeting the target of having that amount of money for our pavement repair and replacement. So the question is, so we anticipated a much different conversation here and are delighted that we're having this conversation instead. But what do we do moving forward? There are a couple of things that we need to be aware of, and a lot of them you've already addressed. This analysis we need to be updating and maintaining annually because there are lots of threats. So for example, when we add new pavement, that's $100,000 more of maintenance that we need to be adding into our projections. So there's that correlation between new and maintenance. There are changes in labor or supply costs. The cost of oil greatly changes what our costs are to do our fog seals and our overlays and our reconstructs. And so if oil's low priced, we're in a good place. If it goes $4 a gallon for gas and $100 a barrel for oil, we're going to be in trouble. So that's one of the things we need to keep up on. And our streets department does a fantastic job of maintaining data, and they look at this every year. Some of the other things that one of the assumptions is that as we grow, because HERF and VLT are both based off of a derivation of a population formula, the idea is that that growth will help maintain the additional that we need for the new roads coming in, but we have to double check that that actually happens in practice moving forward. HERF sweeps are a threat. If the legislature, hopefully they've decided to stop doing that and found other money, but we can always hope.
What percentage of what we should be getting are we getting now in our HERF funding annually? How much is being spent?
Where did our Renee go? He's the one. He's my legislative expert. Kristen, you're in his seat.
My understanding is Leah, you made 120 million that they sweep for DPS.
How much
Gilbert's piece of it?
Statewide, it's like.
How much money is Victor's brother taking from us?
He just moved up from a highest employee to.
And I know I've done the analysis at some point in time, I just don't have that number stuck in my head.
I think they're still right in the 50-70%. They've never been fully restored.
Yeah.
Statewide.
Yeah.
What's what percentage?
Somewhere between 50 and 70.
Last time I checked, we were missing out on $6 million of annual per
Now, what are we getting?
about 6.
What are we getting?
Yeah.
No, we get about 16.4 million is what we're,
So we're
not that I
moving
wrote
to
the number down
70.
so I could remember.
Because the percentage keeps changing. It changes every year, and then the revenues change every year, so it's not like a consistent number.
I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get a ballpark.
Yeah. So that's definitely a threat. But with the amount that they're sweeping now and the amount that we're getting and planning to get for 19 and 20, we look in a good spot. There are also some changes that we need to be aware of long term. So as we start to do more rideshare and have fewer vehicles that are licensed, or as we do autonomous vehicles and people start to share or not want vehicles of their own, the rising generation, some of them aren't even getting driver's licenses because that isn't as much of a connection for them as it has been for other generations. So that would decline the amount of vehicle license tax. As we get more fuel efficient, hybrid vehicles, alternative energy vehicles, then that decreases the amount that we're getting from gas tax. So those two sources of revenue are not necessarily stable long term, and we need to continue to watch that those revenue sources are not declining, or if they are, we're figuring out how to make up that gap, because even if the revenue source declines, $16.5 million is what we need for the pavement that we have.
Well, we have to
currently.
remember this is a whole statewide conversation.
Yeah.
There are efforts to modernize, if you will, our gas tax, but it's a much bigger conversation than Gilbert has control over.
Yes.
We can contribute, but we're not going to be able to change like those
Right.
things.
But we at least have some data and to add to the conversation about why it's so important to us. And the last thing, as we mentioned, is we need to look at the funding for that gold part of the graph. What are the other services? What is fully funding for those areas, because they have needs as well. So with the streets department, as I mentioned, they're fantastic about keeping data. And as part of this process, what they're going to do is start including a benchmark in the annual budget where they calculate, given the change in cost of services and oil prices and all of that, what is the target amount that is needed for R&R for the roads that need rehab that year, and how close are we tracking to that to make sure that we continue to fund the right amount of repair and replacement each year. Some years it will be lower because maybe the roads wear better than anticipated and they have condition that will allow them to last a little bit longer. Some years it's going to be higher because there's more roads that have a condition index, and their field experience and knowledge of the area will help indicate what that is, what those needs are. So what do we do? Oh! I did. Before we talk about what we do, sorry, lots of presentations, I try and keep them separate. New road construction, switching, so that's pavement management, but we also have new roads that we're concerned about, and how do we pay for those new roads coming in? So our existing funding sources for the new roads, we use development agreements and do the agreements for the half streets. We do general obligation bonds, and we've used those for new road construction for a decade now. We have MAG funding. We use the regional partners and that funding source whenever we can and to the fullest extent, and Kristen does a great job advocating for Gilbert and helping to make sure that those projects line up. We have HERF and VLT funding, but I've crossed it out here because, as you've just seen, we're not going to be able to do new roads out of that funding source. We're going to be good to be balancing with what our actual repair and replacement needs are, but there's not excess in that fund to be able to do new construction. And we have to be careful even on when we change the level of service, like the county roads, and add the sidewalks, that portion actually needs a different funding source, or we need to find additional money in the HERF and VLT to make sure that we're not shorting the actual repair and replacement functions. The last one is we have system development fees, but that is only for traffic signals at this point, so it's a smaller fee and it just pays for when we need new semaphores. That came out wrong. What are our long-term new road needs? So this is between now, fiscal 20, and fiscal 2025. These are the segments that we're looking at. There are other roads. They may be in a different funding source. These are the ones that we currently have as potential bond funding. And so if we want to change that funding source, then we need to find somewhere else to put it or some other way to fund it. But I wanted you to see kind of what the needs are. None of these are repair and replacement. They're all new roads or expansion of roads is needed for growth. The biggest driver here is the Ocotillo Bridge, and it's the $60 million project, and it's one that we need the soonest and need to be looking at the soonest. So it drives a lot of the timing. The other projects are needed. As I mentioned, we currently have an SDF, but it's only for traffic signals. There are other jurisdictions around, and we are allowed to charge a system development fee that is for the pavement and actual road widening and construction. The thing that we have to be aware of on this is if we charge it, we can't double dip. So the development agreements, if a developer comes in, pays the system development fee, and then there's the development agreement, we would have to offset the system development fee by the development agreement so that we weren't double charging. We can also look at, the timing on that. We are about to do an RFP to have a consultant help us with our system development fees. So if this is an option that you would like to pursue, this is the right time to let me know so that we could potentially have a consultant do the analysis on that type of a fee. The next one is bonds, two different types. We could do general obligation bonds that would be repaid with property tax In presentation 4, we'll talk about how it could stack up if that's the way we wanted to go. We could also do HERF bonds. They were repaid with the streets funding. I would really recommend against that since we're just finishing the bonds we have now, which is giving us enough to do our repair and replacement. It would reduce the maintenance funding that we would have available. We can do a dedicated sales tax for transportation. This would be an ongoing funding source. So the idea would be for the next 10, 15 years or so, while we're still building out the town until we reach build out, it would be those expansion projects. And then after that, we would have it in place potentially to replace her for VLT funds for our ongoing maintenance. Scale, just so you know order of magnitude, this is just a quick back of napkin. A 0.25% sales tax in Gilbert alone would be about $15.5 million a year, just so you have scale. We can also stop building roads and tell the new people, we're so sorry, you have an unequal level of service, but we just can't afford to build out your roads. Got to have a little humor in the afternoon.
Yeah, we're joking there.
So our next one, park development. And the question that we're going to be asking is, how should we pay for park development? We're going to start out and we're going to focus first on Rittenhouse and Gilbert Regional Parks. And then at the end of the discussion, we'll broaden to what are our long-term park needs. So first off, what are our potential funding sources for Gilbert Regional and Rittenhouse and Gilbert Regional Parks specifically? These are the pots of money that we have to work with. And this is coming from a council ask, I think, and understanding the connection between what possible additional development we have and what's the money that we have to work with. So I've broken the new park system development fees into 2 pots of money. Our current study allows us to do 30 acres, and it has a dollar amount in there. When you multiply the dollar amount per acre by 30, you get $10.9 million is what the study anticipated we would spend for 30 acres. It's probably not enough, but that's what our study has, so that's what we've been working with. The limitation of 30 acres does come from the new park system development fee rules. And there is an exception if there's a direct benefit. So there's 2 different pots because we have 2 different parks. The next one is we have $9.8 million of what we call old SDFs or pre-2012 SDFs. When the laws changed, said anything that had been collected prior to January 1st, 2012 still followed under the old rules. So we can use it on park acreage above 30 acres. We do need to spend it by January 1st, 2020, that pot of money. The next, we have $20 to $24 million from land sale proceeds that we anticipate. Keep your fingers crossed for a great market this fall. And that's the 80 acres at Chandler Heights and Greenfield Roads. It was purchased originally with the pre-2012 park SDFs, and so we can use it for those same types of purposes. Because of the way that we asked the question or advertised the question on the land sale, we did connect it to Gilbert Regional Park, so we should use that money at Gilbert Regional Park. The next pot of money is $16 to $18 million of land sale money. That's for the 58 acres at Germain and Greenfield. It was purchased with unrestricted or general obligation money, so it doesn't have the same system development fee type of restrictions. But we do need to use it at Gilbert Regional for that same purpose of when we asked the voters or described to the voters what we would use the money for, we had connected it to Gilbert Regional. Then we also have general fund. There's limited capacity, so we could fund things over time. There's a park GO bond. We would need voter approval, and it would be repaid with secondary property tax. Or we can do a PFMPC bond. Those would require PFMPC board approval, and it would be repaid over time with general fund money, because that's the only pot of money. Parks is pretty much general fund or GO bonds. Okay, so this next portion, we're going to go through the different phases. We have Rittenhouse, we have Gilbert Regional. We're going to talk phase 1, phase 1B, and then build out costs for each of those two parks. And because I don't know the amenities as well, I'm going to phone a friend.
Thank you.
And let Rod tell you about the amenities.
Okay, so not as exciting as streets. I know, they're very exciting. Rittenhouse Phase 1 As you heard in the council update that I gave about a couple months ago or so, the amenities on the phase one using the system development fees comes out to be a couple fields and some parking, and basically it's more focused on the fields and the irrigation lake. Once we go to 1B, Kelly's going to talk about this in just a few minutes. The loan that you all approved and with the eventual land sale allows us to be able to maybe put another $3.9 million to phase 1B. It doesn't build out the entire 30 acres, but it does allow us to add extra 2 fields, a playground, and some ramadas to provide some shade and some revenue opportunities. The build out, though, however, is a total of 13 fields. This makes a substantial contribution to our field needs analysis report. And there's, in doing some public outreach, we did some public outreach, and the only thing that the community really wanted, in addition to what we currently have, is a dog park. And so it's a very low cost thing. We can put in something similar to what we have at Crossroads, probably the lowest cost item that we could do out there to satisfy that. So they were very happy about that. We do have an area for dog park. Some of the things that are planned for this, for the $42 million is, and Kelly, that's the additional cost over phase one, correct? So over phase one and phase 1B, it'd be an additional $42 million. Ramadas, trails, sidewalks, complete package, 700 parking spots to support, additional parking spots to be able to support those 13 fields. One of the things that we also wanted to put in here was an obstacle course so that public safety can use it when they do their training and recruit academies and things like that, PT, if you will. And then the public can use it too to even prepare for.
And it's a trail around?
Yeah, it's that, and it's also has some of the idea going into it is more of a, you know, an obstacle course where you actually would go through things, under things, around things, things like that, over walls, that sort of thing. Again, this would be at the build-out phase, not in phase one or phase 1B. Now, Gilbert Regional, any questions on Rittenhouse before I go to the regional? This, yeah, it was 16.8, and that's all system development fees. And then 3.9 million is what Kelly's gonna be talking about here in a few minutes. So, Gilbert Regional Phase 1, this was presented also to council, and for another 16.9 million, we are putting in 8 pickleball. Pickleball, of course, was not even on our radar 4 years ago, but it's one of the most emerging sports right now in Parks and Recreation, and it seems to not be going away. What we tried to do on all these elements, by the way, is we did our business plan, and we made sure that each one of these were categorized by the number to be able to hold tournaments and to attract those revenue opportunities. So 8 pickleball is the magic number to hold a weekend tournament, and so you know we're going to put those in. Each one of these also has room for expansion. So like for example, you'll see the 6 tennis courts, but in a future phase we're going to build an additional 2. You can see that towards the bottom right of the picture. The iconic play structure. So the green area where it says park, and the entire area is 30 acres, but the area where it's in green is really the focus of phase 1. And you'll see in just a few minutes how robust that particular area is for the 8 acres. The rest of it is going to be rough graded and will allow us to be able to quickly develop it once funds become available. And so you're going to see in a few minutes the iconic play structure, splash pad. You'll see the restroom building. The restroom building is very unique. We also have an irrigation pond, so we're not building the lake in phase 1. And of course, we have the entrance, and all the off-site infrastructure goes into this. So for $16.9 million, we've stretched our dollars, and I'll tell you how we did that. Before I show you the pictures of the park, the renderings, the concepts that is going to be delivered to the public next week for the first time, we did have a focus group just recently with caregivers and parents of disabled, and they love our concept because the park, especially the playground area, is very accessible. So we know we have to do it to ADA standards, but to make it accessible and inclusive means you don't go to the park and go, that's the ADA area. It's throughout the park, and you'll see some examples of that. Another thing that you'll see is that we use topography. Topography, in this particular case, replaces the need to have an engineered structural solution. We have a lot of dirt on site, so you'll see that we actually are building topography into this site in order to maximize our play value at the lowest cost possible. And so instead of having an engineered solution, you're going to see a lot of mounds. One of the areas is called a mountain, actually. And it's pretty exciting in terms of we added so many play value options, amenities, because we didn't have to spend a lot of money in elevated structures. So you'll see that in just a few minutes. Okay, and then, I'm sorry?
I don't see shade on that list.
Yes, and so shade, they're doing a shade analysis. We do have in the budget to plant mature trees. So we're not going to put in the small trees. We're going to immediately have a tree impact. And so we're doing a shade evaluation too, just for you. What's that? Yes, and so if you remember, the business plan had about 13 ramadas, I think, in phase 1. And they're going to be located around this. They're going to have, you'll see a different price point come up because we want to maximize our revenue in this particular site. And we think they'll be highly rented. Okay? Let's see it.
No basketball courts.
Not yet. They come in a future phase.
The only way to get you to be in favor of the next one.
Okay, so this is a splash pad. So at the risk of getting into the details, this is the falls. This is the splash pad area. It takes advantage of some opportunities with topography. You'll see that the topography is built into this. It's all ADA accessible. It has dry zones. It has activators that are very local. The ADA contingency really enjoyed that aspect. There's a Todd area. You're looking at that now. And that allows for separation from the big kid area. And you'll see elements that are conducive to Arizona's topography. The restrooms are going to be off to the right. I don't know if you get to see them. They are 2 stories. And so the restroom shares a common wall, but there's one level and there's another level. So each level, all 3 levels, is 30 feet high. Each level is accessible with wheelchair and any type of access. The next one you're going to see is the tot lot area. And the tot lot, again, there's a spine that goes through the entire park where people can just walk and meander. Everything has been designed to be able to analyze how you get from the parking lot to the area. And so there's parking on 2 sides of this particular park in phase 1. Lots of seating, lots of shade, a lot of interactive. If you look at the ADA component for disabilities, the disabilities are not just physical. They're cognitive, social, and also sensory. And so we try to take advantage of all those, and each one of our amenities have been analyzed to be able to meet those 4 needs. One of the big things in our trend right now are friendship swings, and you'll see an example of one there. that's where two people can get on the swing, a parent and a child, and they can interact and just hang out and swing nicely. The community wanted at least 3 or 4 of those, so we're going to have those 3 out as well. Now for the big area, the big kid area, which adults can go on too. So this is Bridget, you and I on a friendship swing. This is the mountain. So this is the mountain, and we're really excited about this. Every single play element has been analyzed for if a person with a physical disability goes down a slide, how does they get back up? How does the caregiver get back down? As you can see, some of the slides are big enough that the caregiver can go down with the participant. It has a zip line. The zip line is off to the right there. And as you approach this, the mountain, if you will, the mountain is quite large. And if you haven't been to the Pioneer Park yet, they have similar type amenities. So the canyon will allow you to climb up off to the left there. And this is very interactive. You go inside, and you have a whole new world inside of this structure.
So I'm going to really fly right over those needs because we've talked a lot about it, especially prior to me being here and especially since I've been here. The direction, oh. So that's a surprise. Do we have a thumbs up? Randy, do you know the Cougar fight song?
I do not.
All right. So thanks for the surprise. I didn't know that was there.
Randy, did you slip that in there?
So we had talked about the need, and when we talked about the need for both PD and fire, we talked about the training gaps and talked about what that cliff that's coming up, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But so we've talked about the need. Really, it's a financial retreat. We're talking about how do we pay to get us those gaps covered. So that's why we're here today, is to identify the funding mechanism to fund this training facility. So our goal, obviously, is to be best in class, smartest in class. We enjoy the luxury of being second safest city in the country. And I say it's a luxury because that is not easily earned. There's a lot of work. It's a community effort. It's a town effort. PD, fire, a lot of things, parks and rec, all those things go into making us the safest in the country. And I say second safest, but I think we're first. To heck with Irvine. But everything we do, between building parks, building streets, everything we do is to make our community better. And this training facility is essential to continuing that second safest city or first safest city status. We've got to have the equipment, we've got to have the properly trained personnel to keep us at that level. So in our previous discussions, we had talked about what we have to do to accomplish our current training. And the majority of that is going outside the town in order to get that training. This map is just a reminder of us, PD, going all the way down to Coolidge to do our driving training, going to Tempe, Scottsdale, Mesa, to accomplish both PD and fire training. That's time away, that's money and time away from the town while we're going to other locations. Either we're paying fees or it's personnel costs, equipment costs to get out of the town to accomplish our training. We're almost third largest municipality in the region, which I think would make us fourth in the state. Our neighboring facilities, they're at capacity and we're near at capacity. That future availability is unknown, but everything is trending towards it's not going to be available. It's not a matter of if, it's when, and it's coming quicker than later. Going into also the predictability, we don't know with state funding changes to AZ Post and training dollars being reduced every single year, we've got to be able to produce our own recruits and do our in-service training. We talked about the geographical distance as being away. Time away from the town is money spent not here. So we talk about the aging department. So you've seen some of the slides before where we mentioned the attrition rate and the growth rate. So So this is just a snapshot of, we combine the PD and the fire numbers. So within 2 years, in 2020, 42% of PD and fire sworn personnel are eligible to retire, leaving only 58% that are not. You fast forward 5 years and it gets even worse, that 85% combined are eligible to retire. So that is a huge gap. Not only do we have to train and hire for our growth, but we've got a lot of people. I've lost, 4 this month, and I'm losing 3 in March, just on the PD side through retirements. So we have a normal in PD attrition rate of 10 a year. That's slowly going up. Each year it's going up a little bit. But then on top of that, we've got our retirement eligible employees, and that's continuing to go up each year. So this is another graph explaining that. Just on the PD side, over the next 5 years, from attrition, growth, we will hire a minimum of 180 officers in that 5-year time span. 180 all the way up to 259 officers over the next 5 years. On the fire side, they're looking at 60 to 70 through attrition and through growth for the fire side. The average, when you combine PD and fire, the average years of public safety experience when they retire is 25.75. Fire's a little bit higher than, apparently they treat them a little bit better, I guess. But they do a few more years of service than PD. Ours is about 23 years of service on average when they retire. Combined, just last year, we did 194,051 calls between PD and fire in the town of Gilbert. So I had mentioned the cliff that we're heading towards. With the attrition rates and with the growth that we're coming up on and the lack of resources outside the town, we are heading towards that cliff, and we need to have this training facility so that we don't go off the edge. All right, so the problem if you don't have a training facility and you don't do the proper training, lawsuits. The number one lawsuit specifically for PD and for fire, but mainly for PD, is failure to train. Lawsuits, and we did a little bit of research, and this is really a combination of different studies. On the average jury award has been $2 million. The average initial claim is around $10 million towards PD, and this isn't Gilbert numbers, this is nationwide. Lawsuits have increased 500%. That was over a 20-year time frame, is that right? And then on average, 1 out of every 32 officers will be sued at some time in their career. Victor?
How do Gilbert's numbers compare?
Wait, and I will tell you. Our biggest, the thing we get sued the most for are the vehicle operations and the use of force claims that come with that. So it's actually on my computer. You want to spout out ours real quick?
Thought you had it memorized, so.
No, I do on my computer. Currently, sorry. So I'll add. Let's go back to the picture of Randy with the rose. If I remember correctly, it's $15 million.
So current notices of claim that they would tell us what they're going to be suing us for is just under $15 million, and then we have 3 active litigation cases, which can range, in the multi-millions, but we don't know what the outcome of those will be. And 90% of those are use of force cases or a search and seizure issue.
We have 1 claim currently, and obviously everything's pending, so I won't go into the details of them. 1 for an accident, 1 for a shooting, 1 for a dog bite, which is, in retrospect, it's a lot less than where I came from, but we don't want to get to that level.
We're going to move on to the scope of the project. Just to remind you, what we're here to ask of you is the ability to close the training gaps that we've identified and presented to you, and then ultimately finding a funding mechanism for the training center. So this is the, going back to when we kind of got started restarted in this project, a lot of questions about how can we phase this project. So we came up with a few solutions to that phasing question, and this particular solution is full build out. This fills all the gaps. This gets us where we need to be today and where we need to be as we get to build out. So all of the elements that we presented to you before are included in this phase, along with the the budget that was developed by the team. And in this situation, excuse me, the funding requirement would be just over $70 million. That's the gap in the funding that we need to fill after you take the land sale out of the overall project cost. With the facility today, this is what the utilization would look like. So you can see with the green that there's still opportunities for that growth towards the future. And as we grow as a community, we add employees and we start to use the training center, those start to change. And then as you can see, as we get the build out, that's what the facility looks like. We're at 100% utilization almost entirely through the facility. And one thing I'll mention about this is what our neighbors' facilities look like today. This is why we can't get into those facilities and use them on a regular basis. This is why they are even, Mesa is a great example, they're doing some of their training off-site now because they don't have the capacity to do it in their own facility until they expand it, and they're struggling with how they're going to do that as well from a financial standpoint. But as you can see, the facility is built to take us through build-outs, so we don't have to come back and say, we need more room, we need more of this, we need more of that. This is designed for that. The prop area, so this is separate from the classroom area in the administration building. These are the props out in the training village, and in 2018, we anticipate the utilization would be about 91%. Of course, when we get the build out, it'll be at least 100%. If that's possible, at least 100%. Be 100%. So solution 2. This includes eliminating the shooting range right down here. This really does hamper PD's ability to maintain the training levels of their personnel, as Chief Solberg has already explained to you about the shooting incidents. They have some capacity now across the street or at Public Safety Building, but they're not able to meet the requirements of the training. So this is really critical for them. But it's included because it is, I guess, a solution. It is a phase that could happen. One thing I'll point out to you in this is that when we phase it back in, you're talking about taking a total project cost of $84 million to well over $90 million to bring that one particular phase back in. But it does come with a smaller funding requirement of $57 million to fill the funding gap. Going to solution 4, this one takes out, as I've mentioned, the shooting range, community area, and now we've taken 2 of the props and removed those. As you remember from the presentation, we had the strip mall and then also the 2-story residential structure. And so those will be eliminated as well. Brings the funding requirement down to 49.2, but if we phase those back in say 5 years, we're talking about $95 million instead of $84 million to build the project. So there are some financial consequences doing this. This is not the best long-term approach. It is certainly the most expensive. This also eliminates our opportunity for some regional training and other revenue opportunities that might come from using the facility. The other thing I'll mention is with the PD side is that this takes away their only residential structure that they can operate in. The other residential structure that would remain is a Class A building, so it's not suitable for police officers to use after firefighters have been in there, so because there are contaminants that are left behind, so they're not able to use that particular building. So it puts more stress on them to be able to meet their needs. So if we eliminated or went with phase 3 or 4 or solution 3 or 4, this is what you see for utilization in 2018. As I mentioned, it puts a lot more pressure on the other parts of the training center to meet our needs. And if you go to 2030, we're way beyond the full capacity. And the training village utilization without those 2 buildings would be at 153%. That means that 53% of our needs would have to occur outside of that facility from a practical training standpoint. We'd have to still find somewhere else to go to meet those needs if we phase that. So our recommendation is to go for full build out and option 1, to build the facility once, to move forward in developing the entire project, and to identify that funding source. That's Kelly's. I'll not get ahead.
We are going to close this one out fairly quickly, and then we will hop over to the fourth presentation.
My plug, the white plug.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you. You're so nice.
done. Do you want the other white plug?
Nope, this is good.
Sorry. That was mine. It's okay, we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, close this one out, then we'll go on to our last presentation, which is balancing everything, figuring out a path forward that hopefully we've got a majority comfortable with. So for public safety, training facility, we have about 4 different options. This, unfortunately, with the changes in the system development fee legislation, we can't use system development fees to do this facility moving forward because it's no longer an allowed purpose. So we have the option of using general fund. We've talked about the capacity. We'll talk about capacity in our next presentation. There is the land sale proceeds, so the prior location, we can sell that, about $14 million. We're hoping in that ballpark of proceeds that we could use to offset the cost of the facility. Obviously, we can do bonds, general obligation, which is property tax paid, or PFMPC, which is general fund paid, or we can do a combination of these options. So what we're going to work through here is we know there are a lot of competing funding needs, and we're trying to find a path forward. I'm going to walk through the need and a path forward, which is a possibility. It is a way to accomplish all of the things that from my understanding, are the things that we want. We can modify from there. So if you'll let me just get through that, then we can discuss and modify.
I see where I put that one. Me too.
Funding, this is one of my favorite games, and it's great practice for budget because it is how do you maximize, put things in the right places that give you the best options moving forward and give you the best return on the investments that you're putting in. So we know that there are several things that we're going to try and fund or that are possibility to fund. We've talked about $70 million for public safety. We've talked about $180 million for streets, and we've talked about $125 million for parks. When we update and look at the long-term financial model with the actual 2017 data and looking forward, we are still in really good shape, which is great. When I plug into the model, it has about $5 to $8 million per year for CIP capital expenses that we fund out of the general fund. Now, these are typically things like, and moving forward, what they're planned to be irrigation line and controller replacements, lake embankment, stabilization, building rehabs for our facilities around like roofs and flooring and different things, Muni 1, computer system replacements, park playground replacements, those types of things. And so if we want to use the general fund to cash fund different projects, that's about the capacity we have, 5 to 8 million. If we took out the 2 million of PSPRS, which I don't recommend, we have a little bit more capacity. But then we also have to find another funding source for these repair and replacement types of things that we're currently doing out of the general fund. So there's not a lot of capacity there. It would take a good amount of time to be able to do a $50 million project. We have competing needs for this funding source already. So that's a difficult place to find capacity. So with that in mind, I looked at some citizen feedback that we have from a survey that was done asking voters, would you approve a slight increase to secondary property tax to pay for the town's additional expenditure of maintaining and building road infrastructure, police fire training facilities, and parks? And those happen to be the 3 things that we're talking about in competing needs here. And you can see that voters were quite positive, especially for not having any background information on what those specific projects would be. And so with that understanding, said let's go ahead and look at what that would look like. So the blue here, what we have, we know rates and levies. Rate is the dollar amount per $100 of assessed value that would be charged for your property. The levy is the total amount of money that the town would get in order to pay debt service. We adopt the levy. Voters are usually more concerned about what their rate is on their individual properties. If we just plunk down, blue is existing debt, green is the public safety, red is streets bonds, and then orange is park bonds, noting that we probably could wait until 2024 to do those, asking voters in 2022 if they wanted to do park bonds. But since we know that there is a need in the future, looking to see if there is capacity if we wanted to go that route at that period of time. When you just plunk it in, that's pretty ugly, because we're getting up in here into about $1.40 property tax rate in 2022, and it's all over the board, and there's not a lot of beauty in that, which drives me nuts as a budget person. So what are some things that we can do? If we do step one, pay $1.7 million additional dollars in fiscal 19 coming up, because we have some debt that's callable, so we can do that. It would increase our tax rate to $1.06, which is what it's historically or been for several years before that. It would save the taxpayers $250,000 of interest because we would be paying existing debt earlier. The second step would be for fiscal 20. Issue the public safety bonds, and it would bump the rate up to $1.15, which we have had for 10 years prior to when we had it at $1.06. So it's not an unknown rate to our citizens. Step 3, in fiscal 21, we would pay extra principal on the public safety bonds, which would save taxpayers $775,000 about in interest, and it would keep the rate at $1.15. So using the assessed value, the growth in assessed value, and keeping the rate at $1.15, which would be about a $32 million levy. And then from 22 to 24, structure the new streets bonds to fill the gap, keeping the levy at about $32 million. This would cost a little bit because we'd have to push some capacity into the future years in order to level that. So about $1.9 million. If it works to do the transportation impact or system development fee, then the streets bonds may come down from 180 million to something smaller, and that may create enough capacity that we could pay full payments and not have to do the additional interest there. So what does that look like? This is how that smooths over time. So we have the existing debt. We have a gradual increase up to the $115 per $100 of assessed value that stays there. And then it would eventually, or it would float down as assessed value increases. On the levy side, we would be again a gradual increase up to fiscal 21-22, and then fairly level after that point in time. So it's a way to get all of the projects in with having minimal impact to the ratepayers in property tax. So what would the impact to our property tax, our residents, be? For the same $250,000 house at a 103 rate, total property tax for the town is about $158, up to the 115, which is $30 more per year. So that is a path forward. Thoughts, concerns, reactions?